Well, my name is Mike from Cubalaya, and I'm going to take a moment here and take you through the Fair Chase reel and how we go about servicing it, greasing it, and just make you more comfortable with your reel, how to take it apart and put it back together if needed. So this is the Fair Chase. This is our 9 to 13 weight model. And what we're going to do is we'll start by removing the spool off the frame. Pretty simple. This is your center cap. It is threaded down on a shaft. So all we'll do is we'll turn this counterclockwise or left. And as we unwind that, we'll see that the spool will actually start to come up from the frame. And simply unwind that until it doesn't go any higher. Then you can simply raise the spool right off the frame assembly. The cap that we have here is held on by an O-ring, so that should stay in place. If for some reason this does come undone, you'll see the O-ring there has a little bit of grease on it. Our cap, we put a little bit of grease inside the threads. And what we'll do is we'll just set this on top, push it straight down, and that should just float in place there and be held down by that O-ring. Moving on to the frame, what we have here is pretty straightforward. It's a aluminum frame. This is a 3/16 stainless gear assembly that we've designed and produced. And these are our clicker assemblies. Now, these are custom springs we've designed. They're very robust. And what we need to do is make sure that we keep those greased so that we don't end up hardening the metal. And we do that pretty simply, and I'll show you here in a minute. This is our one-way bearing. This can simply slide off the shaft. The direction that it's in right now is for a left-hand retrieve. As you can see, it winds in this direction. And on the outbound, it engages the clicker against the pawls, which allows you to wind in without engaging the actual clickers. So it'll keep your guides a little happier. Basically, if you wanted to reverse the direction of this reel, all you have to do is take this bearing off, flip it over, and put it back down in the shaft. And now you can see it winds in. This would be a right-hand retrieve, as it would rotate this way, and then it would engage the clicker in that direction. So we're going to take this off. Below that is a thrust washer, and this washer goes between this clicker gear and the face of your bearing race. And it's important that when we reassemble this, and I'll show you in a minute, that this sits right down in the seat on here. As you can see, there's a little lip right here, and we'll make sure when we put this washer on that it's seated around that lip. But we'll take that off. You can then pull this clicker gear off, and you can see it's got a bushing pressed into it, and that rides on the shaft. So we'll take that off. Now you've got just your clicker assemblies, and we can do two things with this. We do encourage you to keep grease in there. It doesn't require a lot, and that's why we've provided you with this syringe with a little bit of grease in it. And it's just as simple as we've got two holes, one in each one of these caps, just holding the syringe against the hole and just simply putting a little bit of grease down inside there. And then you'll wipe off the excess. And sometimes the grease will ooze out from here, which is just fine. We'll rotate this clicker back and forth just to make sure that grease gets in there nicely. And that's really all you need to do on that. We recommend doing that every 5 or 6 trips, I would say, is probably best. The grease will stay in there, but certainly if you're rinsing it out a lot, that could wash away some of the grease. So we like to keep that grease. That keeps our spring life and also our pawl life as they're touching each other in there. The way the pawl works is as that pawl turns sideways, it puts pressure on the spring, and then that in turn creates the click strength that's on the clicker gear. In the event that you have a spring that needs to be replaced or a pawl, removing this is pretty simple. Any small Phillips screwdriver, you just want to be sure to not lose these screws. They are small. And we'll just take these 2 screws out, and And then this cap will lift off. And beneath that, we've got our little clicker pawl, which looks like a piece of pizza. And you've got your 2 holes there, it threads in, and also that's your centering hole. You can see the spring is in here and it's bowed a little bit. It is preloaded ever so slightly. So when we put it in here, we just push on it a little bit and get it to seat in there. Same way on this side, it seats in those pockets. Once that's on, and if you do anything with this or you want to clean it out and grease it, go ahead and do that. When you go to reassemble it, what we'll do is we'll take a little dab of grease if we have it apart and just put it between the spring, as you can see right there. And then we'll set our clicker pawl right there just like that. Pretty straightforward. This housing cover has I'm just taking the screws out of this, has a little pin that centers in the hole which goes through our pawl. What I like to do, since the spring has a little bit of preload on it, meaning it's putting a little pressure down on the pawl when it's in position, is I set this clicker housing just like so, and just move it until it falls in line with the hole on the pawl. So just like that. Now we've got the pawl inside here, and all we're going to do, and I'll do that again so you can see, is simply slide this back with your 2 fingers, and it should snap right down in there. And as you can see now, it's flush on the bottom. It's sitting nice and flat right down in there. Same thing on the other side. And if you just hold your thumb on here and just to test it, you can move that pawl and feel it on the spring there. It should be nice and sprung tight, but be smooth. Shouldn't bind in any direction. So now that we've got that back together and this is all sitting like this, we'll go ahead and we'll reinstall our screws. One at a time. Again, be careful not to lose them. And also we want to be careful that we don't over tighten them. It doesn't take a lot of force once they're down. We'll do the first one, leave it loose, put our second screw in, and we'll just simply bring these down to where they're snug and then just give them a little extra to tighten them down. And now, as I mentioned, wipe off some of the excess grease. This pawl goes back and forth. You might see the grease. You see the spring moving as we do that, and that's good to go. If you don't want to take it apart, totally fine. Just go ahead and grease it through this hole here. Now to reassemble, all we'll do is we'll start with our clicker gear, which will slide right down on the shaft, and it'll fall with the pawls in between the teeth on the gear. The reason that we have 2 clickers in this reel is for redundancy, and I guess really just for redundancy. In the event that something happens with one of them, you have a backup. It also helps distribute the force evenly from side to side. So as you can see, both of them are acting at the same time. There's an even number of teeth on the gear, so every rotation is both clickers engaging, which effectively means whatever force this one adds, you can double it because you have 2 of them. Just like that. Next, we'll take our thrust washer and we'll put that over this. Now, if this is crooked on here, sitting sideways, and you go to put the bearing down, it's going to hold the bearing up too high. So what we want to make sure we do is we take this thrust washer, set it over the shaft, and then there's a little, as I mentioned, there's a little step in there where this will sit around. And if for some reason you want to be sure, just push your fingers down. It should sit nice and flat down on there, just like so. Reinstall your bearing in the direction. We're going to keep this as a left-hand retrieve. So we'll make it so the bearing spins freely in this direction, and we'll just rotate that down and just put pressure on it and make sure everything's sitting nice and flat. You can also test to make sure that you've got the click in the right direction and the rotation in the correct direction. We'll then take the spool, and I recommend using a little, very small amount of grease in the threads there just to keep the corrosion out of our threads and between 2 different types of metal, with this shaft being stainless steel and our cap being aluminum. we like to make sure that there's some protection in between them. So we can take our grease, put a little bit of grease in there. Also, if we want, we can pop this cap off and put a little bit of grease, right? Or just rub a little bit of grease on the O-ring. Again, we'll set the cap on here. It should snap down like that. It should spin nice and free. If for some reason the O-ring gets pinched, it won't rotate nicely like this, but it should sit just like that and be held in place. To put the spool back on the frame is pretty simple. We've got 2 flat spots on our bearing race here, which you can see, and we have 2 flat spots inside the spool frame, or inside the spool rather. And all we'll do is just line those up, and our spool will just fall right back on place. Now, without pushing this together right now, all we'll do is simply screw this down, make sure it threads on nice and straight, and you'll see it'll start to draw the spool back onto the frame. If you've done this correctly, when complete, the rooster should be facing up, the same direction it was when you took it off. If for some reason it's sideways, like this, chances are that washer we spoke of is off center, and you'll just need to pop it off, reline that up, and put it back on. So once this is down, we'll give it a little snug of the fingers, and we've got the reel back together. We'll make sure that it winds in our retrieval nice and smooth, and our outbound, it should click against the clicker. You'll also want to check, and obviously we always encourage rinsing the reels off after every use, especially in salt water. Fresh water, not as important, but salt water, you have to. Salt is an enemy of all metals, and it's always best practice. If for some reason the knobs get some salt residue in them, you can just simply spray those out with a hose or underneath the sink, and that should rinse out the salt and keep these nice and spinning freely. That's pretty much it. If you have any questions or comments, please write them below. Feel free to email us at cubaliaoutfitters@gmail.com. You can find us also at our website, which is just Cubalia Outfitters, and on Instagram and Facebook as well. But yeah, we're really proud of these, and we hope that you enjoy them as much as we do. And with a little bit of maintenance and upkeep, it should last you for years and years to come. We stand behind our product 100%. They're made right here in our shop, made and assembled here in the USA, and we're very proud of what we've done. So if you have any questions, comments, please leave them below, and we look forward to seeing you out on the water.